I want to start by telling you two lesser-known stories from the Torah. The first is the Battle of Amalek. After the Israelites left their life of slavery in Egypt, they stopped to sleep in a place called Rephidim. As usual, the Israelites cried out with complaints. They were parched, no water. They were miserable and pleaded to go back to Egypt. Moses strikes a rock as God suggested he do, and water flows from the rock for all the Israelites to drink. Just after this experience of divine intervention, as they were feeling a moment of content, one Torah verse later, we are told that Amalek and his people fight with the Israelites. Moses, who himself doesn't fight in the battle, goes and situates himself at the top of a mountain. He's looking down. It says that when his hands were raised, the Israelites prevailed, but when he let his hands down, Amalek overcame them. Think about literally holding up your arms for an extended period of time. Moshe's hands grew so heavy that he couldn't lift them on his own. So Aaron, his brother, and a man named Hur held Moses' hands up so that the Israelites could overcome their enemy. 2 books and a few chapters later, we find the Israelites Ba-Midbar, in the wilderness. A familiar story, though this time attacked not by the Amalekites but the Canaanites. Complaints again. Lama ha'elitunu mimitzrayim? Why did you make us leave Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread and no water. We have come to loathe this miserable food. Just as the Israelites are a bit worn down, so is God. So instead of providing food and water, God sends a nachash, a snake, and it bites many of the Israelites who yet again have taken to complaining. They cry, "Okay, we've sinned against you, we get it." And now God says to Moses, "Make a figure of a snake and mount it on the wall. Whoever is bitten by the snake will look up at this figure and will be healed." What might we take from these two stories? If we have kavanah, intention, if we turn ourselves upward and towards God and truly pray and rely on the plan that God has laid out for us, then life might lead us to happiness and blessings. Unatana tokef, who will live and who will die? But teshuvah, repentance, tefillah, prayer, and tzedakah, giving of oneself, will lessen the decree. There it is. A young rabbi telling you to pray to God and all will be okay. My guess is that is not the message you came here for today, nor have you experienced this as a reality in your own life. Prayer is not some magic formula. And while I love prayer and talking about it, it's also not what I came to teach this morning. So stick with me. The Mishnah, the first rabbinic commentary in which the rabbis really try to understand each verse of Torah, brings together these two stories of Amalek and the snake to provide a very different answer. These stories sit semi-uncomfortably right in the middle of a technical discussion about the shofar. Things like, what type of animal must the shofar of Rosh Hashanah be made of? Or a shofar that's cracked and then glued together, even though it appears to be whole, is actually not kosher. Or if one sounds a shofar into a pit or into a large jug, if that person clearly heard the sound, they fulfilled the obligation. But if the person heard an echo of the sound, they have not fulfilled the obligation. And right in the middle of this very detailed discussion comes these two stories, followed by two questions. 1, do Moses' hands make or break the battle? In other words, was it the lifting of Moses' hands that caused the Israelites to win? 2, does the brass snake kill or cure? In other words, does the image on the wall actually have any power? In both cases, the Mishnah teaches what we learned already. So long as Israel mistaklin kilape mala, turns their eyes upward, shabdin et libam la'avihem shebashamayim, and directed their hearts toward God, they were victorious. They were healthy. And if not, they would fall. Now, I'd like to think that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the redactor of this Mishnah, chose to put these two stories right in the middle of this discussion of the shofar so that when thousands of years later I was voraciously looking for the reason why we do not blow the shofar on Shabbat, I would find my answer here. Do you know why we don't blow the shofar on Shabbat? For one, we know that Shabbat is at the core of Jewish tradition, a mitzvah that Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel called a palace in time, special and set apart. And the rituals and restrictions of Shabbat take precedence over even something as important as Rosh Hashanah. Traditionally, that means we also don't use musical instruments, though we know in our synagogue and many others that much halachic discussion has led us to a point where music is permitted. So it seems that the importance of Shabbat is not the reason why our machzor says in red ink, do not blow the shofar on Shabbat. And so why? One rabbi in the Talmud teaches that according to Torah law, one is permitted to sound the shofar on Rosh Hashanah and even on Shabbat. It was the Hachamim, the later rabbis in rabbinic times, who decreed that blowing the shofar on Shabbat is prohibited. Then it was that same rabbi who explained that yes, all are obligated to sound the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, but not everyone is an expert in sounding the shofar. Some of us can relate. It's not easy. Therefore, the sages instituted a decree that the shofar should not be sounded on Shabbat. Period. But why? The Talmud goes on. Lest one take the shofar in their hand and go to an expert to learn how to sound it or to have the expert sound it for them. And due to their preoccupation with the importance of getting the shofar sounded, they might carry it 4 cubits in the public domain, which is a desecration of Shabbat. Should I read that again? The reason that we don't sound the shofar on Shabbat for roughly the last 2,000 years is just in case someone who is not an expert might carry their shofar to an expert on Shabbat and violate the Shabbat prohibition of carrying objects from one place to another. First of all, let's please make a commitment to each other that we always know who the expert shofar blowers are and we don't have to go searching for them on Rosh Hashanah. If you're a legal type thinker, you might be wondering about an expert shofar blower who already has their shofar at the synagogue. If they brought their shofar before Shabbat, would they be permitted to blow it? Listen, we can ask all the questions. And quite frankly, when I read this text, I was so hopeful that carrying wasn't the only reason. Please, rabbis, give me another reason. Hundreds of Jews and their families are coming to synagogue 1 to 2 times per year and associate Rosh Hashanah with the shofar. And we are going to skip it? Full disclosure, there are rabbis this year who said that reason is not good enough. It is antiquated. It is irrelevant. We are blowing the shofar on Shabbat. And for a moment, I considered it too. I considered it knowing that many here would probably be in favor of it. And I considered it knowing that there are also some who would not have liked it. Just like there are some here who don't like instruments on Shabbat or potluck dinners in the synagogue because of what it means to keep kosher or other ritual changes that have been made over the years by me or by rabbis before me. On the same page of Talmud, another Mishnah is brought to set up another shofar conversation. Only this time, through a series of considerations in post-temple times, the rabbis permit the blowing of the shofar on Shabbat. It says, it happened once that Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbat and people gathered together from all the cities. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai petitioned the community, let's blow the shofar, he said. The community replied, shouldn't we deliberate and render an official judgment first? The rabbi said, we'll blow the shofar and then afterwards we'll decide what the law is. After the shofar was blown, they said, okay, now let's sit and figure out what the law should be. And he said to them, The horn has already been sounded, and we can't go back on what's already been done. We know that our tradition allows us to make intentional changes or decisions to enhance our experience and to widen the circle of inclusion. And unlike this Mishnah, those decisions are not on a whim, rather based on careful study, process, and deliberation of core Jewish texts. And even so, I can imagine that there could have been a case made for blowing the shofar on this day, Yom Teruah, the ultimate and most festive day of blasting. But we decided not to. We held on to tradition to uphold who we are, because if we said yes to everything, would we stand for anything? You may remember that last year I spoke about the autonomy that each of us has to make our own Jewish choices. And my follow-up question this year is, why? I believe that at the heart of those choices is ahava v'yirah, love and fear. Why do we make the Jewish choices that we make? Do we choose Jewish because we love Judaism and all it has to offer us? Or do we choose Jewish because of the fear of being without it? To make sure horrors like the Holocaust never happen again, to fight anti-Semitism, or to make sure we have a democratic Israel? The answer is probably different for each of us, maybe a little bit of each. But perhaps, whether we realize it or not, we actually choose our Judaism because of an understanding of yirah, as our rabbis did, as wonder and as awe. The contemporary sage Rabbi Louis Jacobs teaches that religion without yirat shamayim, fear of heaven, is no more than a sentimental attachment to ancient forms from which the spirit has departed. Put in another way, the awe and wonder in Judaism is what gives depth, meaning, and connection. My sense is that we continue to do Jewish because something awesome happens when we do. Not awesome like fun, but awesome like something beyond you and me, out of our control, something that cannot be understood and often not articulated. And the medieval work Orot Tzadikim believes this fear is really love. When you come here on Shabbat, there is a joy that cannot be defined. When you show up to observe the yahrzeit of a loved one, the feeling of being enveloped by community is something greater than you can understand. We each have moments in life, death, sickness, health, that touch our hearts in ways that we cannot describe. And the sound of the shofar may be one of those moments. The combination of the loud blast, the comfort of tradition, the closeness of community can and should lead you to a place of true awe. Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, a conservative rabbi who serves a congregation in New York, in an article called A Choosing People, wrote, "The Jews I serve are not halachic Jews living lives bound by Jewish law. Yet, their lives are nevertheless filled with mitzvot. Here I am referring to mitzvah neither as good deed like volunteering for a local food pantry, nor according to its literal meaning of commandment. Instead, I'm defining mitzvah as a positive act of Jewish identification. Not blowing the shofar might feel like something was taken away, but actually it is a positive act of Jewish identification, and one that asks us to step beyond our own desire or preference. We are asked instead to put tradition and Shabbat at the core of decision-making. It is living in ahava for and in yirah of those things that make us who we are, a boundary that without it we might ask, what do we stand for? So let's return to those two Torah stories. Harav Yehuda Amital, an Orthodox rabbi of the 19th century, took those two opening stories of Torah, Amalek and the snake, on the wall, and he saw how they were connected in the Mishnah and tried to figure out what exactly the redactor, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, was trying to express when he placed this teaching right in the middle of the laws of Shofar. His explanation is that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi saw Jews who viewed the blast of the shofar as laden with some mystical power, a spiritual force beyond our comprehension that arouses divine compassion. There were those who thought that the shofar blast itself, through some magical power, triggered God's mercy and led to God's favorable judgment of us. But he opposed this view and equated the shofar with Moses' hands and the brass serpent. The shofar, he taught, possesses no power beyond that lying within Moshe's hands. It is the subjugation of our hearts, which accompanies the fulfillment of the mitzvah of shofar, that arouses God's mercy in our favor. In other words, just like Moses' hands or the figure on the wall, the shofar is not about the shofar itself. It is not about what it is made out of or who blows it or the greatness of the sound that it makes. It is the catalyst to inspire the love and awe that leads to teshuvah and other mitzvot in the world. Visiting the sick, caring for the environment, making a minyan for a mourner, speaking out for those who live on the margins of our society. And in the silence of the shofar on Shabbat, we have to make an even stronger effort to hear its great call. We should each continue to believe in the power of lifting our arms in service of something greater, to look up to the image on the wall if it gives you the strength that you need to heal yourself or someone else, and take the silence of the shofar not as a missing piece of this Rosh Hashanah, but as a way to strive to live in love and in awe. Love and respect of our deep tradition, and awe that we are part of something so much greater than ourselves. And come back tomorrow, because while we can certainly find ways to be without the shofar, the sound of it tomorrow will stir your heart. Tekiah Shivarim Teruah Tekiah Gedolah Shana Tova Umetuka, a healthy and sweet year to all of you.